¡Wow! ¡Hey! Pura vida, mi gente. Thanks for tuning in once again. I really appreciate you guys taking the time to do that every time. Shout out to all the real ones out there. Today, we're just going to go ahead and continue reading a great book we've been reading. This is part 4 of this series. We're going to read 3 chapters today of this book. A lot of good, deep information to correlate with all the previous research. More corroboration, more proof America is the true old world. And not just old world, but we're talking about antediluvian times. Yes. All right. Shout out to all the new channel members. Shout out to all the new patrons and anybody supporting or donating. I really appreciate it. Thank you for that. Let's get right into it, okay? We are back on this book, Researches into the Lost Histories of America, or the zodiac shown to be an old terrestrial map in which the Atlantic isle is delineated so that light can be thrown upon the obscure histories of the earthworks and ruined cities of America. This is by W.S. Blackett. This is the year right here, which is 1884. That's what it means. And we continue where we left off, and that was in chapter 9. We have read every chapter. Make sure to check out the previous parts if you haven't seen those videos. We went over a lot of great information in the previous chapters. This one is the geography of ancient America and its Asiatic settlements, lie concealed in the Icelandic and Scandinavian mythology. The settlements which must have been formed in prehistoric America in connection with the navigation described in the last chapter are best elucidated by Scandinavian sagas. Before, therefore, the histories of America, which have been transmitted by classical authors, are introduced, it is necessary to study the northern legends. All right? There's a connection with these people, with ancient America, is what I've been trying to tell you. It may be said that mythology is history in disguise. In the Prose Edda, that doctrine is distinctly stated. The work is called The Deluding of Gylfi. King Gylfi of Svitjod was amused with a parcel of funny stories, dressed up in all the vulgarity peculiar to rough seafaring people, and they read like the adventures of individual men. But when the acknowledged delusion is removed, and the stories are put into comparison with the traditions of other nations, it is found that they form a cosmogony second to none in the ancient world. Its heroes swell into histories, its gods into nationalities, its journeys into migrations, and it becomes a gazetteer of the old world's geography. Instead of being limited to Iceland and Sweden, it contains in it an allusion to America. This is what they've been talking about. The true old world, those mythical lands, all those places was America. America figures in the Prose Edda as the land of the giants. All right, you guys hear that? In the Prose Edda, the land of the giants is America. This appears in the story of Thor's adventures on his journey to the land of the giants. All right, you guys listening? He and his companions proceeded eastward on the road to Jotunheim, until they came to the shores of a vast and deep sea, which having passed over, they penetrated into a strange country. This must have been America, because there is no other great and deep sea eastward of Scandinavia and Russia than the Pacific. This is in accord with the classics, where the giants and the titans and the Aloids locate in the same land. Okay, they've been talking about America the whole time. Even the Greeks. We've gone over this a lot, right? In this tradition, the land is called Jotunheim, the home of the Jutnes. It is in the tradition called the origin of the Hrimtursar, or frost giants, that North America is described. After speaking of the formation of the rime, Har says that part of Ginnungagap that lies toward the north was thus filled with heavy masses of gelid, vapor, and ice, whilst everywhere within were whirlwinds and fleeting mist. But the southern part of Gin Hun Gagap was lighted by the sparks and flakes that flew into it from Muspelhem. The being that was formed by this process was Ymir, but the frost giants call him Or Gelmir. From him descend the race of the Hrimtursar. All right, and he's from where? The Americas. Listen. Now, it will be shown in the chapter on the mound cities that Ymir the giant is Hercules. Listen, in an earlier form, so that Ginnungagap must be the name by which North America was known to the ancient Icelanders. All right, America was Ginnungagap. And Hercules, this is an earlier form of Hercules who might possibly be Samson, the Danite. All right, check out the previous videos. Then it is said that the sons of Bor dragged the body of Ymir into the middle of Ginnungagap, and of it formed the earth and heaven. It is also observed that they were themselves descended from the frost giants, and that it is mentioned as the reason why they were strong. From this, it may be gathered that the Rhine giants were Greenlanders or Eskimo, or races in the high north of America, who had crossed the Atlantic at an early period and formed an element in the Icelandic and Norwegian population. All right, body bag for the illusion. They told us history in reverse. This is what I've been trying to tell you. We've been seeing it always in reverse. He's telling you right here. They went from America over there and formed an element, again, in the Icelandic and Norwegian population. I told you, a lot of these ancient peoples of Europe were coming out of the true old world. The oldest land that came out of the waters, right, is right there in this same region. This is called the Mingling of the races. Another piece of geography is in the myth of the supreme deity, where it is said that all that are righteous shall dwell with him in the place called Gimli or Vingolf, but the wicked shall go to hell, and thence to Niflhel, which is below in the ninth world. Gimli is uncertain, but in a future chapter, hell and Niflhel will be shown to locate in the great forest of the region of the Ohio and Miami, listen, and which must have been the area of the empire of Saturn, and the earthworks, which must once have constituted the domicile of the race of Cronus and Hercules in the underground hemisphere. Listen, this is where they're from. Mention is also made of a place called Muspelheim, but the southern part of Ginnungagap was lighted by the sparks and flakes that flew into it from Muspelheim. There is nothing said that serves to locate Muspelheim, but the description of it is sufficient to show that while Niflheim is intended for the northern part of the region, at present constituting the United States of America, Muspelheim completes the geography as forming the southern part of the same great country. All right, so like the southeast, northeast, this is sufficient for the present as it serves as an introduction to the valuable legend of Loki. All right, here we go, and his progeny. There is another deity, continued Har, reckoned in the number of the Aesir, whom some call the calumniator of the gods, the contriver of all mischief and fraud, and the disgrace of gods and men. His name is Loki, or Loptur. He is the son of the giant Farbautu. His mother is Laufi, or Nal. His brothers are Baileist and Helblindi. Loki is handsome and well-made, but of a fickle mood and most evil disposition. His wife is called Siguna, and their son Nari. Loki has likewise 3 children by Angurbodi, a giantess of Jotunheim, from America. The first is the wolf Fenrid, The second, Jormungand, the Midgard serpent. The third, Hela. Now you guys hear this, where these people originating? The gods were not ignorant that these monsters continued to be bred up in Jotunheim, and having had recourse to divination, became aware of all the evils they would have to suffer from them. All-Father therefore deemed it advisable to send one of the gods to bring them to him. When they came, he threw the serpent into that deep ocean, by which the earth is engirdled. But the monster had grown to such a size that, holding his tail in his mouth, he encircles the whole earth. Wow, are we talking about a dragon? You see how big this, you know, what they call a monster serpent, right? Is it a dragon? He's so big, his tail encircles the whole earth. Hela he cast into Niflheim, and gave her power over 9 worlds, regions, into which she distributed those who are sent to her. That is to say, all who died through sickness or old age. Here she possesses a habitation protected by exceedingly high walls and strongly barred gates. Her hall is called El Vitner. Hunger is her table, starvation her knife, delay her man, slowness her maid. The one half of her body is livid, the other half the color of human flesh. She may therefore be easily recognized, the more so as she has a dreadfully stern and grim countenance. The wolf Fenrid was bred up among the gods, but Tyr alone had the daring to go and feed him. It is quite safe to treat this tradition as a deluding story, which contains in it great histories, which must have taken place in times of high antiquity, by which America was colonized by Asiatic races. Thus to hijack, seen in reverse, and the 3 children of Loki represent 3 great centers of colonization in that land. Odin manages it. Who is Odin? And the myth says he is All-Father, the great colossal deity of the Eastern world. Remember, maps are flipped. On the principle of this treatise, 2 of the settlements can be located with accuracy. The serpent and the wolf are in the zodiacal map. The first delineates Mexico, say the western shores of America, and the wolf portrays the upper waters of the Amazon. Call it, for want of a better name, Peru. All right? Hela may, for the present, be put into the great woods of the Red Man. These 3 characters have to be compared with the 3 Gorgons of the classics. One of them is plain. The Medusa, with serpents for hair, is equivalent to the Midgard serpent. The wolf answers to Uriel, and Hela to Steno. They may also be compared with the 3 judges of the infernal regions, Sarpedon, Minos, and Radamanthus. As the Icelandic legend is much of the most geographical, it will form the basis of the localizations of future chapters. The tradition of Loki and his progeny receives great light from some of the Russian songs. Mr. Ralston, in his work on the songs of the Russian people, at page 106, speaking of the demigods and fairies, says, when Satan and all his hosts were expelled from heaven, some spirits fell into the lowest recesses of the underground world, where they remained in the shape of karliki, or dwarfs. Some were received by woods as lichi, like the fauns and satyrs. At page 107, the author observes, after death, the soul had to begin a long journey to sail across a wide sea. A road led to the other world. Sometimes it was a rainbow or the Milky Way. The abode of death had 3 names, the house of the sun, lying eastward beyond the ocean. Further on, he refers to the many-headed snake. A hero penetrated into the castle of the snake and conquered him. Commenting upon these songs and their resemblance to the traditions of Loki, it may be noticed that the simple hardening of the cha or ch in the word lichi brings the 2 names together in identity, as if they were ethnological and real. Satan, here mentioned, may be supposed to be Saitan or Shaitan, god of the Barabinsky. Huh, Barabinsky, huh? Caesar. It has already been observed that Loki must have gone to America as he passed over a wide ocean in the east. Here is exactly the like movement. Then these spirits become dwarfs and fauns and satyrs. The two last have been shown to embody the North American Indians. The first remained to be discovered. The many-headed snake has shown his horrid fangs. His capture awaits study. This fitly introduces the history of America, and it will be worked out not by writers of myths, but by real historians of Sicily and Phoenicia. All right, and that was the end of chapter 9. We're gonna continue. We're gonna go right into chapter 10. Hope you guys enjoying the reading so far. You guys can see what they're trying to let you know. So they're always gonna say, "Oh, they must have come here first from Asia, then they went to over there Scandinavia." But no, this is the true old world, guys. This is Asia Major. This is the far disease. This was connected to Asia, North America. This is India Superior. All right. So chapter 10, the history of the Atlantic Isle by Diodorus Siculus and the Cosmogony of Sanchoniathon are the histories of those Asiatic colonies in America referred to in the last chapters. Let the threads of evidence now be caught up by the way of recapitulation. The course of inquiry has disclosed the fact that America is depicted in ancient maps. All right? So again, get caught up with the previous chapters, what he broke down. Among the Mediterranean nations, it was mystically called Oceanus. All right, Oceanus is America. We went over this already. Part 2. By Oriental writers, it was called Mount Calf. This is all in reference to America. Among the sages of India, it was designated Sweta Dvipa and Suvarna, where resided Vishnu and the Hindu water god, right? Vishnu was in America, listen, who is both in name and nature identical with the European Oceanus. It has been further proved that the vast insular hemisphere has been called the Atlantic Isle, the domicile of a race called Oceanides or nymphs, okay, from the Atlantic Isle. Among these Oceanides are the Titans, the chief of whom are the Atlantides, okay? This is Atlantis, been telling you, a race that has undeniably mixed itself largely with the histories of the old continent. This race carries the name of a mythic character that stands out prominently in history as an astronomer who invented zodiacs. By some extraordinary blunder, this isle has been supposed to have sunk. They think it's sunk by a blunder. That's an error, he's saying. And with it have sunk the histories of by far the larger part of antiquities of the world. All right, when they forgot about America, so-called Atlantis, when they're saying it got sunk, they actually sunk the histories that was connected to a larger part of the antiquities of the old world. By a course of sharp investigation and reasoning on myths and symbolism, the only sort of writing handed down from high antiquity, it has been further discovered that this isle has been visited and colonized by Asiatics. What Asiatics? This is Greater Asia, who must have come in Japanese and other vessels. Must have. He's conjecturing right here, not knowing that America is the oldest land that came out of the primordial waters. It now remains to be seen whether there are any histories or descriptions of these colonies extant among the writings of the ancient themselves, either in the form of simple narrative or in that of allegory, as common to all nations. The present chapter will be limited to the acknowledged documents of the learned. This new inquiry is full of interest inasmuch as it discloses the fact that two very important historical documents, which no one has ever been able to understand, contain the identical information now sought. The first is no less than an actual history of the Atlantic Isle itself, written by an acknowledged historian, Diodorus Siculus, and setting forth in plain language that it belongs to that island. But for the theory of the sunken isle, this document must have been always taken for the history of America. All right, the sunken isle, right, aka Atlantis, that was America. It's the history of America. The second is what is termed the Cosmogony of Sanchoniathon. This paper, being the cosmogony of the Phoenicians, might be treated otherwise, but its internal contents prove it to be a similar history to the other. It is remarkable that these two documents are written neither by Romans nor Greeks, so-called Romans and so-called Greeks, right? That's a fake history. Yet the details of both the histories and the names that appear in them are the same as those which constitute the theogonies of both those learned nations, so that there can be no reasonable doubt that they are based upon facts well known to all nations. It is to be observed that the personages mentioned in them are neither obscure nor unknown names. On the contrary, they belong to the highest rank of mythic beings, well known to European writers. All right, in the transcription of these interesting documents, it is not necessary to give them verbatim, partly because they are both very confused and partly because they are overlaid with interpolations. The parts which belong to America are uncomfortably mingled with what pertains to the old continent. A succinct epitome with a slight comment will most conduce to edification. All right. He said, Sign Deep Day, he said, it's like they mix, America with the old world. So, you got to kind of, he's trying to say you got to dodge the hijack and you got to try to discern which is which because they're mixing it all together. But little does he know, guys, again, America's the true old world. That's why it is taught, it's always been all these mythic, all these legendary ancient tales of these mythical lands and these mythical gods and people. Most of the part, guys, they were talking about in the Americas and the people there and their stories, legends, and all that. A succinct epitome, he says, with a slight comment will most conduce to edification. It continues, says Atlantis from Diodorus Siculus. The Atlantides inhabited a rich country, all right, a rich country, bordering upon the ocean, and were esteemed to excel all their neighbors in civil reception and entertainment of strangers. Remember, we had games here, music, concerts, all that. And they boast that the gods were born among them and say that the most famous poet among the Greeks confirms this their assertion when he brings into Juno, speaking thus: the utmost bounds of earth far off I see, where Tethys and ocean boast to be the parents of the gods. All right, we're just talking about America and its people. Now remember, Juno is a corn deity. We've broken that down in my corn videos. They say that Uranus was their first king, who caused the people, who then wandered up and down, to dwell in towns and cities, and reducing them from a lawless and savage course of life, taught them to use and lay up the fruits of the earth and many other things useful for man's life. All right, agriculture. It is said he had under his dominion the greatest part of the world, especially towards the west and the northern parts, and that being much addicted to astronomy, he prognosticated many things that will come to pass in the world, and measured the year according to the course of the sun, and the months according to the motion of the moon, and divided the days into hours. And therefore the people, as at that time ignorant of the constant motion of the stars, did so admire his prognostications, that it grew into a common opinion among them that he was a god. And when he was dead, by reason of his deserts and art in astronomy, they honored him as a god. The starry heavens were called after his name, because that he was so familiarly acquainted with the rising and setting of the stars and other things happening in the ethereal world, and for that his memory had all the honors that could be attributed to him. He was called the eternal king of the universe. They report that this Uranus had 45 children by several wives, and 18 of these were by one Titea. for her benevolence and wisdom was, after her death, reported a goddess and called Terra. Of Uranus and Titea were born several daughters, of whom two were most famous, Basilia and Rhea, by some called Pandora. Basilia, being the oldest, bred up her brothers with the care and affection of a mother, and therefore was called the Great Mother, right? Basilia, almost like Brasilia, right? Brasilia. After the death of her father, by the generous suffrage of the people and consent of her brothers, she was elected queen. Being as yet a virgin and remarkable for her modesty and chastity, she was long unwilling to marry, but afterwards desiring to leave heirs of her own body to succeed in the kingdom, she married Hyperion, one of her brothers, whom she most dearly loved, by whom she had two children, Helio and Selene, who for their beauty and modesty were the admiration of all her other brothers. They say partly out of envy at the issue and partly out of fear, lest Hyperion should assume the kingdom entirely to himself. They committed a notorious act, for entering into a conspiracy, they assassinated Hyperion and drowned Helio, then a tender infant in Eridanos. Upon the discovery of this disaster, Selene, who passionately loved her brother, threw herself down headlong from the housetop, and the mother, while she was seeking for her son at the riverside, dreamed that she saw Helio standing by her to comfort her, and wished her not to grieve too much for the death of her children, for the Titans should execute dire revenge upon the malefactors, and that he and her sister, by the providence of the gods, were to be deified, so that which was before called the holy fire in heaven should be then called Helios, and that which before had the name of Mene should then be termed Selene. Presently afterwards, in a furious rage of madness, she wandered up and down with her hair disheveled about her ears and playing like a mad woman upon a timbrel and cymbal. She was even a terror to the spectators, and while everybody pitied her miserable condition, there arose on a sudden a terrible storm of rain, thunder, and lightning, and she was seen no more. The people hereupon, admiring the prodigy, began to transfer the name of Helios and Selene in honor of them to the sun and moon in the heavens. And being persuaded that the mother was a goddess, they erected altars, and with the noise of timbrels and tinkling of cymbals offered sacrifice, and instituted other divine rites and ceremonies in honor of her. The writer then identifies Selene with Cybele and Phrygia. As this passage does not belong to the history, it may be omitted. After the death of Hyperion, they report that the children of Caelus divided the kingdom among them. Atlas and Saturn were the most renowned. The country bordering the ocean fell by lot to Atlas, who called the people there Atlantides, and the greatest mountain in the world after his own name. They say that he was an excellent astrologer, and was the first that discovered the knowledge of the spear. Gosh, the hijack, where arose a common opinion that he carried the world upon his shoulders, noting by this fancy his invention and description of the sphere. The most eminent among his sons was Hesperus, for piety towards the gods and justice and kindness toward his subjects, being upon the top of Mount Atlas, to observe his motion of the stars, he suddenly vanished in a tempest. The people thereupon, much lamenting the loss of him, that they might forever honor him, called the brightest star in the heavens after his name. Atlas likewise had 7 daughters, who were all called after their father's name, Atlantides. But their several proper names were Maya. Listen, Maya, one of the Maya. Maya is also the mom of Guatemala, Buddha, right? Guatemala, Buddha, Maya. And then we got Electra, Tyget, Asterope, Merope, Alcyone, and Siloone. All these were got with child by several heroic princes, and even by some of the gods themselves, and bore diverse sons, who were the first ancestors of several nations, and for their virtuous qualifications were afterwards called gods and demigods. So Maya, The eldest was God with child by Jupiter and bore Mercury, the inventor of many arts and sciences for the use of mankind. Remember, Mercury is the same as Hermes, is the same as Thoth. All the rest likewise had sons who were famous in their times, some of which gave beginning to whole nations, others to some particular cities, and therefore not only some of the barbarians, but likewise some among the Greeks refer the original of many of the ancient heroes to these daughters of Atlas, for they were in great reputation for wisdom and justice, and therefore, when they were dead, were adored as goddesses and fixed in the constellation of the Pleiades. Nymphs were commonly called Atlantides, because nymphs, in a general term in this country, applied to all women. They say that Saturn, the brother of Atlas, was profane and married his sister Rhea. He had Jupiter, Olympus. There was another king of Crete inferior to the latter. The ancient Jupiter was only king of Crete and father of 10 sons, Curites, and called the name of the islands Ida, after the name of his wife. Saturn reigned over Sicily, Africa, and Italy, and enlarged his dominions over all the western parts of the world, and by garrisons and strong forts kept his subjects. So in Italy they were called Cronia. Jupiter, they say, was the son of Saturn, who, contrary to what his father did before him, carried himself justly and courteously towards all, and therefore he was called father by all his subjects. He succeeded to the kingdom, either as given up to him by his father, or set upon the throne by his subjects out of hatred to his father. So it's funny because, Jupiter, then you got Peter. Peter is the first pope, father, or papa. Papa, that's how we say pope, father, papa, Pita, Jupiter. And through Saturn afterwards, by the help of the Titans, made war upon his son, yet Jupiter overcame him in a battle, and so gained the kingdom. And because he was of a strong body, and endowed with all virtuous qualifications of mind, he easily conquered the whole world. He chiefly made it his business to punish the impious and to do good to all his people. And therefore, after he left the world, he was called Sina, or Zeus, who, they're saying Jupiter, right? From life, because he was the first that taught men to live well, and therefore they, of whom he had done well, rewarded him with their honor. That he was unanimously by all placed in the highest heavens, and called a God and supreme Lord of all the earth. And this is the full account distinctly related of all the gods mentioned and recorded by the Atlantides. All right, again, all these people from ancient America. Here is a history of America. It will be noticed that Diodorus expressly identifies Oceanus with the Atlantis, okay? And he quotes an Homeric verse to prove it. It is a rich country in the ocean. Until the appearance of one Uranus, the people are savages, wandering up and down in a lawless life, destitute of agriculture. To suppose that history so important as those narrated in the document belonged to some island in the Atlantic that sunk and disappeared is the height of improbability, not to say impossibility. All right, it didn't sink. When applied to America, one of the largest and most beautiful parts of the habitable globe, it opens up one of the noblest and grandest chapters in human history. All right, when you connect, when you orientate yourself correctly, you got a true history, then you're able to wake up and see the bigger picture and see the grandest chapters in human history. It restores to its proper place in the antiquities of the world, one of the fairest portions of God's earth, okay? We're just talking about terrestrial paradise, a true promised land. The details of this history will be considered elsewhere. The general scope of them belong to matters and names that are quite common in the ancient literature, both of Europe and Asia. So much so indeed is that the case that it becomes the main impediment to its understanding. Accustomed to treat the great characters mentioned as pertaining to Europe, it requires some effort of mind to adjust them to their proper country. Taken as a whole, the story exhibits the American races as having received among them the blood of Asiatic people. And in the course of ages, the joint races have migrated into the old continent and laid the basis of the modern world. You guys hear what he just said? All right. He's saying they received some Asiatic blood, the American races, and then they went to the old world. And then, so if it wasn't the old world yet, then where did these Asiatic races come from to mix with the American? We're just talking about Americans, basically. It is the true old world. But he's letting you know from here, in the course of ages, they migrated and laid the basis of the modern world. Ancient Americans, we are the civilizers. The Cosmogony of Sanchoniathon. The Cosmogony of Sanchoniathon is said to be a history taken out of the sacred books of the Phoenicians. What Phoenicians? That could include Danites, Tyrian people, so many different peoples. The Phoenicians were sea peoples. And it is composed of 3 fragments out of the writings of Philo. One out of a work called Phoenician History, one concerning the Jews, and one relating to Phoenician letters. After referring to the chaos, there is the following paragraph. All these things, the son of Tabion, the first hierophant of all among the Phoenicians, allegorized and mixed up with the occurrences and accidents of nature and the world, and delivered to the priests and prophets, the superintendents of the mysteries, and they, perceiving the rage for these allegories, delivered them to their successors and to foreigners, of whom one was Osiris, the inventor of 3 letters, the brother of Chana. You see how similar that is to Osiris, brother of Chana, who is called the first Phoenician. These things were found written in the Cosmogony of Totis. All right, that's Tot. It's the same character, same person, and his commentaries, and were drawn from his observations and what he had discovered, by which we have been enlightened. So Tot is telling you Osiris was the so-called Phoenician seafarer coming, and you already know Phoenicians coming out of the true old world, Canaan, America. Genealogies of the wind Colpias and his wife Bao, which is interpreted night, were begotten 2 mortal men called Oeon and Protogonus. Oeon found fruits on trees. The immediate descendants of these were called Janus and Genea, and they dwelt in Phoenicia. And when there was a great want of rain, they stretched out their hands toward the sun in heaven, supposing him to be God, calling him Balsamin, which in the Phoenician language signifies the Lord of heaven. Baal is Lord, as Zeus among the Greeks, Philo or Eusebius. Afterwards, by Janus were begotten mortal children named Phos, Hur, and Phlox. Those found out the method of producing fire by rubbing pieces of wood against each other and taught them the use of it. These begat sons of great bulk and height, whose names were conferred upon the mountains which they occupied. Thus from them Cassius and Libanos and Antilibanos and Bratu received their names. Memrunus and Hypsuranius were the issue of these men. Hypsuranius inhabited Tyre. He invented huts, constructed of reeds and rushes. He fell into enmity with his brother Usos, who was the inventor of clothing for the body, which he made of the skins of wild beasts. And Usos, having taken a tree and broken off the boughs, made a boat and first ventured on the sea. And he consecrated 2 pillars to fire and the wind, and worshipped them. He poured out upon them the blood of wild beasts, which he took in hunting. And when these men were dead, consecrated rods to them, and worshipped the pillars, and held anniversary feast in honor of them. And in time, long subsequent to these, were born of the race of Hypsuranius, Agreus, and Halicus, the inventors of hunting and fishing, from whom huntsmen and fishermen derived their names. Now remember what they tell us about the sons of Cain teaching people, all these things right here. They're mentioned too. Of these were begotten two brothers who discovered iron and the forging thereof. One of these called Chrysaor, which is the same as Hephaestus, exercised himself in words and charms and divinations. Spells, huh? He invented the hook, the bait, the fishing line, and boats of light construction, and he was the first of all men who sailed, wherefore he was worshipped as a god. After his death, under the name of Diomicius, and it is said his brother invented the art of building walls with brick. Afterwards, of these races were born two youths, one of whom was Technites and the other Genius Autochthon. All right, Autochthon. These discovered the mode of mingling stubble with the clay of bricks and baking them in the sun. They also invented tiles. By these were begotten others, one named Agrus, the other Agruerus or Agrotis, of whom in Phoenicia there is a statue held in great veneration, and a temple drawn by yokes of oxen. And at Byblos, or Byblos, he is called the greatest of the gods. These added to their houses courts, porticos, and arches. Agriculturists and those who hunt with dogs are derived from these. They are also denominated Aletai and Titans. From these men descended Minus and Magus, who taught men to construct villages and tend flocks. By these men were begotten Misor and Sidic, that is, secure and just, and they discovered the use of salt. From Misor descended the Tautis, who invented the alphabet. The Egyptian called him Tor. The Alexandrians Toith. All right, this is Thoth, right? This is Thoth. Tautis is Thoth, and the Greeks Hermes. From whom? From Misr, Mizraim, supposed to be son of Ham, right? From Sidic descended the Dioscuri or Kabiri or Coribantes or Samothraces. So almost Kabiri, Karibi, who built the first perfect ship. From these descended others who were the discoverers of medicinal herbs and the cures of poisons and charms. At that time lived Eliom, called Hypsistus, and his wife Beruth, who dwelt at Byblos. By these were begotten Epigenus or Autochthon, whom they afterwards called Uranus, heaven, so that from him the element which is over us by reason of its excellent beauty is named heaven. And he had a sister of the same parents who was called Ge or Ge, earth. And by reason of her beauty, the earth was called by her name, or Gaia, right? Gaia. Hypsistus, having been killed by wild beasts, was consecrated, and his children offered libations and sacrifices to him. Uranus, succeeding his father in his kingdom, married his sister, Ge, and by her had 4 sons, Ilus, called Cronus, Betilus, Dagon, which signifies Ceton, bread, corn, Dagon. Dagon is corn, guys. I've been telling you this in my old corn videos. Dagon means corn. And Atlas. Uranus, by other wives, had much issue, at which Ge, being vexed and jealous, reproached him, and they separated from each other. But Uranus returned to her by force whenever he pleased, and then again left her. He also attempted to kill the children he had by her, but Ge defended herself by the assistance of her friendly powers. When Cronus arrived at man's estate, by the advice of his secretary, Hermes Trismegistus, Thoth. Listen to this. All right, Cronus is talking to Hermes, Thoth. He opposed his father Uranus to avenge the indignities offered to his mother. To Cronus were born Persephone and Athena. The former died a virgin, but by the advice of Athena and Hermes, Cronus made a crooked sword and a spear of iron. Then Hermes addressed the allies of Cronus with magic words and excited in them a strong desire to make war against Uranus on behalf of Ge. All right, we're just talking about Thoth. And Cronus, having overcome Uranus, drove him from his kingdom and succeeded him in his imperial power. In battle was taken a well-beloved concubine of Uranus, who was pregnant. Cronus bestowed her upon Dagon, and while she was with him, she was delivered of a child, and they called his name Demarus. After these events, Cronus surrounded his habitation with a wall and founded Byblos, the first city of Phoenicia. Having suspicion of his brother Atlas, he threw him into a deep cavern and buried him by the advice of Hermes. At this time, the descendants of the Dioscuri, having built some light and more complete ships, put to sea, and being cast away over against Mount Casius, there built a temple. But the auxiliaries of Ilus, who is Cronos, were called Aeloim, and were the allies of Cronos, having a son called Sadidus, killed him with his own sword, because he suspected him, and with his own hand deprived his child of life. He in like manner cut off the head of his own daughter, so that all the gods were astonished at the disposition of Cronos. In process of time, Uranus, when in banishment, sent his daughter Astarte, being a virgin with her two sisters Rhea and Dione, to cut off Cronos by treachery. Cronos took them all and married them, notwithstanding they were his sisters. When Uranus understood this, he sent Aimarmin and Hora with other auxiliaries to make war against Cronos. But Cronos gained the affections of these also and took them to himself. It was the god Uranus devised Betulia, contriving stones that moved as having life. By Astarte, Cronos had 7 daughters called Titanides. By Rhea 7 sons, the youngest of whom was consecrated from his birth, and by Dione he had daughters, and by Astarte he had 2 sons, Potos and Eros. Dagon, after he had found out bread corn, was called god of agriculture. All right, listen, corn, bread corn, cornbread. Dagon is corn. We're not just talking about little grain. We're literally talking specifically about maize when we're saying Dagon in the ancient world, guys. The god of agriculture, huh? Tucedic, who was called just one of the Titanides, or Titanides, was born Asclepius. And to Cronos there were born in Perea 3 sons called after himself Zeus, Belus, and Apollo. Contemporary with these were Pontus and Typhon. Nerus, the father of Pontus. From Pontus descended Sidon, who by the excellence of her singing first invented the hymns of odes or praises in Poseidon. To Demarus was born Melicartus, who was first called Heracles, right, or Hercules. Uranus then made war upon Pontus, but afterwards, relinquishing the attack, he attached himself to Demarus. When Demarus invaded Pontus, who put him to flight, and Demarus vowed a sacrifice for his escape. In the 22nd year of the reign of Cronos, he, having laid an ambuscade for his father Uranus in a certain place situated in the middle of the earth, and having taken him prisoner, dismembered him over against the fountains and rivers. When he was consecrated, his spirit separated, and the blood of his parts flowed into the fountains and rivers. Then Astarte called the greatest, and Demarus, named Zeus, and Adobus, called the king of the gods, reigned over the country by consent of Cronos. And Astarte, having put upon her head as a mark of sovereignty a bull's head, by traveling about the world, she found a star falling through the air, which she took up and consecrated in the holy island of Tyre. The Phoenicians say Astarte is the same as Aphrodite. All right, so we get a whole genealogy and mythology of these so-called Greek gods, Roman Greek gods, right, and Atlantean gods. But it's very interesting. If you guys see, picture real people, picture real family situations, whatever's going on, with the added myth. But there's some historical background to this. And remember, they're saying all this is ancient America, people with ties to ancient America. But you see how a lot of people are getting killed, and their own parents and their own kids fighting the parents, and the nephews and the wives and the brothers and the sisters. A lot of treachery going on, and certain people surviving. And these certain people surviving, listen, are the ones we know in history as the gods, the Greek gods, right? Astarte, Kronos, Zeus, right? They're getting rid of all the rest. says here, Cronus visited the different regions of the habitable world, gave his daughter Athena the kingdom of Attica. After this, Cronus gave the city of Byblus by the goddess Baltis, which is Dione, and Berytus to Neptune and the Cabiri, who were cultivators of the soil and fishermen, and they consecrated the remains of Pontus at Berytus. But before these things, the god Tatis, having portrayed Uranus, represented also the countenances of the gods Cronus and Dagon, and the sacred character of the elements. He contrived also for Cronus the ensign of his royal power, having 4 eyes in the parts before and parts behind, 2 of them closing as in sleep, and upon the shoulders 4 wings, 2 in the act of flying, 2 reposing as at rest. The symbol was that Cronus, while he slept, was watching, and reposed while he was awake. And in like manner, with respect to the wings, that he was flying while he rested, yet rested while he flew. But for the other gods there were 2 wings only to each upon his shoulder, to intimate that they flew under the control of Cronus. And there were also 2 wings upon the head, the one of the symbol of the intellectual part, the mind, the other for the senses. And Cronus, visiting the south, gave all Egypt to the god Tatis, that it might be his kingdom. Listen, so Cronus, talking about a Greek god, said, hey, Tatis, now you can be Tot in Egypt. You can have this kingdom. Here you go. Remember, Tot is the main deity in the Egyptian mythology. He's many gods there. He is Osiris, Isis. He created all that. All right, so listen what they're saying here. Cronus gave Tatis all the kingdom of Egypt. Remember, Egypt is in ancient America. These things, the Kabiri, the 7 sons of Sidic, and their 8th brother, Asclepios, first of all, set down in the records in obedience to the command of the god Tatis. A lot of these are epithets, the same people mixing a lot of mythologies together. This cosmogony, like the story of Atlantis, is manifestly a history of America. All right, so everything we just read, right? I know that was long, and like Kurimeo, why are we learning about Greek mythology here? But hey, he had a point he was going to make, and his point is that all this cosmogony that they were passing down oral history is manifestly a history of America. The story of Atlantis, guys. Listen, there is much about it that would lead a thoughtless reader to suppose that it is a history of Phoenicia. In all probability, Philo and Eusebius thought so. But remember, Phoenicia was in America. So this is what I'm saying. See how they're getting confused? They are copying 3 documents, the application of which they do not thoroughly understand. But when the fragments are compared with those of Diodorus Siculus, the real nature of the history comes out to view. And it is seen to be a description of a race that came into Phoenicia at times of high antiquity and laid the basis of the kingdom. The race must have come from America. From America. All right, and Phoenicians were from here. That's why there's so much relation to so-called Phoenician history. These conclusions are reached by comparing the cosmogony with the Sicilian document and with general mythology. Thus, the cosmogony early introduces the giants who must have lived in the land of the giants. Then appears Chrysaor, who in the classics springs from the blood of the Gorgon Medusa, whom Hesiod puts beyond the ocean in the west. Then come the Titans. There were no Titans in Phoenicia. They were an Atlantic race. Then comes Uranus himself, the same as Uranus in name and nature, to make the 2 documents absolutely identical. Atlas, the astronomer, appears in his own name. Then Cronus has a son, Zeus, just as Saturn in the other document has his son, Jupiter. And remember, we broke these down, who these people were, when it came to Noah, Japhet, Shem, and Ham. Right? These so-called Cronus, Uranus, Neptune, all these people. All right? So that was the end of chapter 10. We're going to definitely go on and continue to chapter 11. We're just going to get one more chapter here. Hope you guys enjoying the read so far. All right? And chapter 11 continues, and it's called Prehistoric America, elucidated by the details of the Atlantis and the Phoenician cosmogony. Okay, so he's going to continue a little bit on that. It says the sign of the crown and its mythology. It is now time to introduce the several constellated figures which compose the ancient mystic or pictorial maps of America. At page 72, and to try to educe from them the secret histories that belong to the separate settlements described in the tradition of Loki and his progeny. The crown comes first. The crown is a figure which surmounts the serpent. In the picture, it looks as if it belongs to the serpent. As portraiture of a country, it must be taken to represent the region lying north of Mexico. Perhaps it may be intended to include the great district lying between the Rocky Mountains and the ocean. All right, that's going towards Queen Khalifa's land, right, from the Rocky Mountains, from the position it occupies in relation to Japan and China. It may fairly be looked upon as the earliest Asiatic colony. They're seen in reverse. We went from here to there, like Connecticut and Massachusetts in modern times, which were the first settlements of the Pilgrim Fathers. The spot now mentioned would be the first colonized, all right? So this is, again, they never gonna say people came out of here. They're always trying to say the old world. It's, even though he wrote this book, he knows America's Atlantis, they still got this hijack in the 1880s and the 1800s. They still can't let go completely. 2024, guys, we know a lot better. We're trying to really see and wake up. No, we colonized Asia. Well, you're calling Asia today Japan and China. You're seeing it in reverse. The situation is convenient for both, even of a primitive construction, as they could conveniently coast by the Aleutian Islands, and this is in accordance with the traditions of the Americans themselves, which refer to the advent of the first civilizers to the northwest, to islands and to ice. The teaching of poetical astronomy in relation to the crown has been referred to, page 88, when studying the story of Ceres and Proserpine. Now remember, Ceres is a corn deity as well. The crown bears the name of the daughter. This agrees well with the present hypothesis. The crown is also called Mitra. In the pictures of Mitra, he is represented as holding the keys of the underground world. It gives a lively and natural interpretation of that symbolism to find him at the entrance of the mysterious region which forms the subject of the present work. Again, in mythological monuments, there is little or no difference between Mitra and Oeon. Oeon also holds the key of the underworld. In the Cosmogony of Sanchoniathon, Oeon is put at the top of the genealogies. In that document, Oeon is vastly earlier than Uranus. The constellation of the crown appears in one of the classic myths. It is that of the daughters of Orion, and is as follows. The daughters of Orion distinguished themselves as much as their father, and when the oracle had declared that Boeotia should not be delivered from a dreadful pestilence before two of Jupiter's children were immolated on the altars, they joyfully accepted the offer and voluntarily sacrificed themselves for the good of their country. Their names were Menipa and Metioche. They had been carefully educated by Diana and Venus and Minerva, and had made them very rich and valuable presents. The deities of hell were struck at the patriotism of the two females, and immediately two stars were seen to arise from the earth, which still smoked with the blood, and they were placed in the heavens in the form of a crown. According to Ovid, their bodies were burned by the Thebans, and from their ashes arose two persons, whom the gods soon after changed into constellations. This myth belongs to a category of ancient worldwide traditions, which the Greeks have misunderstood and wrongly applied to their own histories. That it is mythical and not a personal and real narrative is proved by what is said. These ladies were children of Orion and educated by Diana. If so, where could they have lived? Orion and Diana did not live in Boeotia. Those great characters are impersonations of the great and ancient nations of Eastern Asia. If so, these young ladies must have been Asiatics. Then the deities of hell were witnesses to their patriotism. But was Greece in hell? Then they were turned into the constellation of the crown. It requires no argumentation to show that this myth and traditions of similar character are the floating, uncertain stories of the past world, which the Greeks have turned into myths. What Greeks? See, there is no real history with the Greeks, right? So they grab these stories from somewhere else. Just in the same way as the present day ancient histories of great magnitude are turned into nursery tales. It is not difficult to find out the historic meaning of this interesting myth by submitting it to the principle of interpretation adopted in this work. Menipa and Metioki are daughters of Orion. Orion the giant overhangs the great country of Iran or Persia. He embodies Iran in the histories of the world. Two daughters of Iran could be nothing else than two colonies migrating from Iran. They immolate themselves, a sort of emulation that is very common in these days, where immigrants from their native land are never more heard of. The ladies die. They go abroad. That is a common meaning of a mythic death. It is equally easy to see what part of the habitable globe they went, inasmuch as they were turned into the crown, a constellation which delineates the northwest shores of America. All right. So again, he's saying, they came from the old world and went to America. He's conjuring that, conjecturing that part. Again, America's a true old world. He hasn't gone that far back, so he's just trying to add that part. And he's trying to pick it up where these people are being developed, they're being grown, they become civilized people in the Americas, and then they go out into the world again and civilize everybody else. So, but who civilized the other people that are coming from, where did they pop out of? They're not explaining that, guys. This is what I'm trying to tell you. But it's very interesting how he's telling you how these Greek myths or mythologies, right, are really like children's story. They're not really telling the stories right. This is what they've been teaching us all our lives, guys. They're telling us ancient American history in a form of children mythology. In other words, the inhabitants of the Orient must have joined in the general colonization of America. Must have. You don't know. They must have. This is the Orient, which has been already traced. This colonization from the Orient is very natural, as there is a direct waterway from the Persian Gulf to the land in question by coasting. From what is said of the presents made by Venus and Minerva, it may reasonably be inferred that these colonies must have visited China and Japan on their route. If so, they must have acquired their cargo and their outfit from lands quite competent to supply a divinely furnished ship. But who are these daughters of Orion? There is nothing very definite to answer that question. It may be a matter of debate. They are now traced to the crown, but in all probability the immigrants to that region must have spread themselves abroad east and west, north and south, just as has been the case with modern emigrants on the eastern shores of the same continent. Judging from their names, it is natural to suppose that they mean Mexico and Peru. Mythology, though uncertain in its stories and geographical in its names, Metioche is a proper pronunciation of Mexico. Metioki, listen to that, man, okay? This is what they're telling you right here. The name Menipa is only recognizable as Tibetan idol, but as Tibet is a land of monks, it is plain that an idol is not Tibetan. It looks as if the name were but another version for Menalipa, who is said to be a daughter of the centaur Chiron. If that were so, then Metioki and Menipa stand very well for Mexico and Peru. The signs of the crown is a sort of clue by which to trace the prehistoric histories of America. It forms a convenient point from which to calculate the mythic chronology of the hemisphere. It seems to have been the custom of the hierophantic mapmakers to require that the name of the picture, be it man, beast, or thing, should agree with the land or king. That must be noticed here. In the story of the Atlantic Isle, Uranus is made to be the first king of the island. His name is the same as the sign, through, or though directly spelled. The words clang together. Not only so, but the crown itself seems to have been chosen because it designates a king. Uranus wears the crown as first king of the Atlantic Isle. This agrees well with the mythology of the crown as just stated, as the crown is found to be the landing place of the first colonists, and the spot from which to extend themselves over the length and breadth of the hemisphere. but he can never tell you where these colonies came before they ended up in Atlantis, because Atlantis is very old, guys. Where do they come from? The name of Uranus, of Diodorus, tallies exactly with the Uranus of Philo. They are the same in name and nature. Remember, phantoms and duplicates, guys. We got mixed chronologies. We got people being duplicated, and that's why there's phantoms. That's why there's extra people having the same almost names, almost history. Again, they are the same in name and nature. Uranus has a son called Ilus. He is glossed by Cronus. Here again, Cronus clans with the crown. Cronus is a sort of second Uranus or Uranus. He carries on the history which begins with the others. Both of them are spoken of as builders. Uranus builds cities and Cronus erects walls. Orion, the mythic representative of Irania, has the same name as Uranus, the first king of the Atlantic Isle. His daughters make a settlement in America, and they call it by the same name as their old country. Just as in the modern times, the English settled in Connecticut and the neighboring states and called it New England. There is no difference between the Persian, Phoenician, and the Greek pedigrees. They all have Uranus and G or G at the top of their cosmogonies, all right? So again, it's all the same gods coming from so-called Atlantis. We've broken this down. The Phoenician gods are so these Greek gods are these Persian gods, is these Phoenician gods who are the same as the Atlantis gods. Atlantis is America, guys. Do you guys understand? In the second Fargard of the Vendidad, Ariana and Gao tally with Uranus and Gi. Gao is said to be the dwelling place of Sutka, Scythia. In the Scythian cosmogony, Vindrus is glossed by Uranus in cold water, pointing plainly to the oceanic hemisphere at his domicile. Now remember who the Scythians are too. We've gone over all this. Using the crown as a chronological epic and putting that epic at the top of American histories, as known to the Sicilians and Greeks, the Phoenician cosmogony exhibits a much earlier history. The when Colpias and his wife Bao beget Aeon and Protogonus, they have Janus and Genea, and they Phos, Pur, and Flux. They, the giants, men Runus and Hypsurianus, whose issue was Usos. It would not be very wrong to call this the Antediluvian period of prehistoric America. Wow, guys, I didn't know, I hadn't read this chapter. I'm reading it with you for the first time. This book is great. I know this probably drop on every chapter, so I'm just reading it live with you. And he's saying everything I was already thinking. When we're talking about this history, this mythology of the so-called Greeks and Phoenicians, is basically the antediluvian period of prehistoric America, the antediluvians. So what do you mean colonists came if these are the antediluvians? What's older than an antediluvian? But that term does not go deep enough into the vast antiquity of the human race. The characters that stand at the top of this curious cosmogony belong to a period far anterior to Uranus. It is in the light of the Mosaic cosmogony that this subject has to be studied. It may be noticed that the opening passage in the Phoenician cosmogony runs parallel with the second verse of the first chapter of Genesis. All right? This is not the place to study the Mosaic cosmogony, although that splendid epitome of the world's vast antiquities, even yet in the 19th century, remains to be developed. It is sufficient here to observe that the mystic characters of Colpias and Bao have their correspondence in the second verse of Genesis. All right. So when he's saying still in the 19th century, remember, he wrote this in the 19th century. He's in 1884. This is when he published this book. All right. There is reason to think that the very early form of prehistoric America, comprising the opening passages of the cosmogony of Sanchoniathon, pertains to the woods and forests of the red men. Okay, Eastern Woodland, Aeon, and Protogonus were immediate descendants of Colpias and Bao. Mythologists consider Aeon to be analogous to Kronos, Hercules, and Phanes. All these mythic personages belong to the woods and prairies. Ymir is the old name of the constellation Hercules, who overhands those regions. Cronus becomes a savage, and Phanes is but another spelling for Faunis, already shown to be the North American Indians. Huh, just like the famous gypsy family, the Fauns, the Fas, the gypsies, remember? So again, the Faunis are the North American Indians, but as Protagonist is son of Colpius, and as Ymir is more ancient than Hercules, they must impersonate the red man at times far earlier than Uranus. The same conclusion is reached when the passage now under review further says that these begat giants. Membrunus and Hypsurianus were the issue of these men, as was Usos. Dr. Movers, in treating of the cosmogony, considers both Hypsurianus and Usos as synonymous with Hercules. Moses treats the giants as a race that sprang from the union of gods and men. It was a race in which the people of the two hemispheres combined in the formation of the giant race. The constellated figures of the giants, Hercules and Ophiuchus, localize the giants as the occupants of the region in which are found at this day the great earthworks, right? The mound builders. So that story about, them mixing and creating giants, the gods and the humans, just like in the Bible, right? The Nephilim, right, are the offspring of the angels and the humans. And they were giants, just like it says here. And again, they're in the region in which are found at this day the great earthworks. This brings back the history of the crown, because both the documents put Uranus or Uranus as commencing what may be called the post-Diluvian part of the history. By comparison of the documents, it is plain that these two personages are the same and that they belong to the same location, the region of the crown. Here it will be noticed that Uranus is credited with astronomy. As Uranus is stepfather of Atlas and the Atlantides, it must be inferred that the astronomy of Uranus is the Aslan's astronomy. Okay? Again, the astronomy of Uranus is the Aslan astronomy, which the Spaniards found in Mexico. Both the documents then exhibit the movements of the race, or say the immigrants. Uranus has many wives. It wants no penetration to see that that expression means that the race separates and passes off into many parts of the country. 45 children spring from that marriage. This is quite analogous to the immigrations of the Pilgrim Fathers. They spread over that land. In the other document, it is the same with Uranus. He has many wives and much issue. It may be convenient to follow the story of Uranus. All right, again, these are all the same. They got the same, almost the same name, same people, just passing on in different cultures. Uranus is called Epigos or autochthon, and he had a sister, Ge. They had 4 sons, Cronos, Betulus, Dagon, and Atlas. Here again, it may be convenient to follow Cronos, who seems to retain his father's name. Uranus leaves the country and comes back again when he pleases. From this, it must be inferred that there were numerous arrivals of colonists from the mother country. This is in accord with the Greek myth of Ceres, but there must have been disagreements among the colonists, for Uranus attempts to kill his own children, and when Cronus arrives at man's estate, he opposes his father's Uranus. All this is very natural. It is the common result of colonial settlements. The thirst for land creates disagreements and strife. The issue of it is that Cronus drives his father Uranus from the kingdom. Cronus, who is a most interesting character in history, has 2 daughters, Persephone and Athena. This must have been in the region of the crown, because this sign carries the name of Persephone. These 2 daughters assume great consequence in the underground world, and it throws great light upon the obscure mythology of Europe. To discover the origin and nature of those deities, Persephone is the wife of Pluto. She is the Amenti. Isis, listen, it's the same as Isis, queen of the Manes. Athena is queen among the Furies. She is decorated with the bloody head of the Medusa, which Perseus cuts off in one of the wars, which must have sprung out of these settlements because Medusa locates not far from the crown. It is interesting to follow Kronos and to try and find what became of him in these Atlantic histories. Of course, it is somewhat dubious, but still there is enough said about him to trace him further. Kronos surrounds his habitation with a wall. Having suspicion of his brother Atlas, he threw him into a deep cavern and buried him. Then Kronos, who is called Ilus, slays his son Sadidus and his daughter, and all the gods are astonished at the disposition of Kronos. Uranus then sends Astarte, Rhea, and Dione to cut off Kronos by treachery, but Kronos takes and marries them. All right, so remember, he's just quoting the mythology right here, right? There's another quotation, but that can be deferred. From the last of these statements, it may be inferred that many more arrivals of colonists appear on the seacoast of the crown. They come under three names and try to cut off Kronos. Instead of that, he marries them all. That was perhaps the best thing he could have done. Instead of colonial quarrels, they settled down an amicable agreement. Then it is said that he throws his brother Atlas into a deep cavern and buries him. Fortunately, this can be understood and located. Atlas has the center of the Atlantic isle, so that this portion of the colonists must have gone to Central America. All right, Central America, Atlas. That seems a long way to go, but that only shows the magnitude and extent of these histories, and it gives a hint for the correct interpretation of the whole story. It embraces the entire continent. But it is the remaining clauses of these quotations that serve to show what became of Kronos himself. He turned savage and surrounded his habitation with a wall. If he turned savage, he must himself have migrated from the crown into the land of savages. That this was so is presumable from the statement that all the gods were astonished at his disposition. Under these circumstances, it is hardly conjectural to conclude that he and his followers must have crossed the Rocky Mountains and descended into the great prairies and forests of the vast region that now forms the United States of America. This teaching is strongly confirmed from the remarkable circumstance mentioned that he surrounded his habitation with a wall. It would certainly be difficult to find the solution of that mysterious statement simply from the cosmogony itself, but when the tracing of these myths, with the assistance or rather compulsory leadings of the zodiac, carries Kronos into the land of the Mound Cities of America. Okay, listen to what he's telling you. It can scarcely be doubted that Kronos must be credited with the erection of those vast earthworks. So who is Kronos, huh? Remember, who is Kronos in the Bible? We've broken this down in previous videos. This is not the only argument. It is sustained by two other things which are worthy of notice. On a critical inspection of the Cosmogony of Sanchoniathon, it may be observed that the proper name for Kronos is Ilus. Ilus is glossed by Kronos. It does not appear who did that, but it may fairly be assumed that it was done by those who had sufficient authority for it. In this work, there is a close adherence to names. Identifications where the name is dissimilar are rejected, except when the ancients themselves make the gloss. That is the case in the present instance. There is no Kronos in what can be detected concerning the mound cities, but their erection is ascribed to the ancient race of Ali in the work of Mr. Schoolcraft upon the subject of the North American Indians. Take away the Greek terminal, us, and the name is the same. The other thing that gives countenance to the present theory that the earthworks of North America are attributed to Kronos is that the Latins have no Kronos. They gloss the name by Saturn. There can be no question that those two gods are one and the same, right? Kronos is Saturn. And a small work published in the Biddle Library entitled The Life of Tecumseh, the noted Shawnee chief of modern times, it is said that the Iroquois name of the Shawnees is Satanas, okay? The Shawnees is Satanas, which means the devil, right, or Satan. That is certainly a very curious fact. And it can be relied upon, as there is no reason to suppose it cannot. It goes very far to confirm the mythic tracing which brings Kronos into the lands of the Shawnees. So Satanas relating it to Saturn, which is Kronos. To close the life of Kronos, it will be observed that he is guilty of parricide. In his 22nd year, he lays an ambuscade for his father Uranus in the middle of the earth and dismembers him over against the fountains and rivers. He then has 3 sons, Zeus, Belus, and Apollo, and then he is found in Phoenicia, giving Byblos to Baltis. It certainly is a most surprising thing to find the great gods of Greece and Syria in the lands now called the United States. It is freely admitted that no one would look for them there unless they were obliged to by some justifiable mode of mythic interpretation. It wants confirmation. The Cosmogony of Sanchoniathon is a document acknowledged by all learned men to be very valuable, and the Mediterranean nations appear to have employed it in the construction of their several systems of mythology. It must be referred to another chapter to introduce a series of myths or group of myths which can be used to test the conclusions here reached having relation to the great European and Asiatic gods that have just made their appearance, all right? All these gods were people from America. The reader must now retrace his steps to the crown to get a further view of the movements by which prehistoric America must have been peopled. The Sicilian historian introduces the next piece of history when he makes Pandora marry her brother Hyperion, and they together have 2 children, Helio and Selene. As the crown is contiguous to the serpent, but more northerly, Hyperion must be placed along the west coast of North America. This throws him into the region which modern maps call New Mexico, and it is in that region where are found the temples, pyramids, and other ruins which are the wonder of modern times. Where? In New Mexico. Hyperion is a son of Coelus and Terra. Pandora is both sister and wife of Hyperion. She, in the classic myths, is daughter of Japetus and Clymene. Japetus, Japhetus, Japhet, Japetus. This relationship is in accord with the Phoenician document, but it is more explanatory. It reduces the personages to ethnology, as Japetus stands for the Zapotec race. Listen to this. Japetus stands for the Zapotec race. That's in Mexico. Pandora in Asiatic life is the Great Mother. In Mexico, she is Tona Cacique, all right, the corn mom. This mythic marriage opens out into the appearance of Helio and Selene. At length, Hyperion is assassinated, and Helio is drowned in Eridanus. This assassination of Hyperion is one of the most notorious incidents in mythology. All the writing nations of the earth have a tradition of it in some form or other. As the Edredon is the Nile, some great expulsion must have taken place from Mexico to Egypt. Again, from Mexico to Egypt. They're saying over there, but Egypt was here. All right? Culture's moving though. But origin where? In Mexico. Still pursuing the comments on these 2 documents, it must be observed that after the death of Hyperion, the children of Coelus divided the kingdom. The reconstruction of the Atlantic nationalities makes Saturn and Atlas to be most renowned. The Sicilian Saturn is the Phoenician Kronos, so that what is said of Saturn takes up the history of the woods and prairies of the red men. Mexico is lost sight of, and the story introduces the mysterious histories of the mound cities in the north and of Central America on the south. Here the Aztlans and Atlas appear. Atlas appear. It is curious to notice what is said of Saturn. He was profane and married his sister Rhea and had Jupiter, Olympus. Jupiter was good and so-called father. He succeeded to Saturn and was set on the throne by his subjects out of hatred to Saturn. Afterwards, by the help of the Titans, Saturn made war upon him, but Jupiter overcame him in battle. This will be worked out by the means of other myths in later chapters. It is sufficient here to notice that the vast race of the North American Indians must have now become civilized. The good Jupiter follows the savage Saturn, and a god of Europe arises out of the race of civilized Indians. The two divisions of the race fight, and a battle ensues, which is famous in the myths of Greece, so-called Greece. The story then proceeds to people Central America proper. Atlas is located there. Okay, Atlas is located there. Off in the country bordering the ocean, and he calls the people Atlantides. He has 7 daughters. It is not necessary to pursue this history at any length here, as it will come up again in the study of Central America. All right, we're going to get into all these chapters as we keep going, guys. Make sure you catch up so you can be up to date. This ultimate settlement of the Uranian or Aslan race, which one is it, huh? In Central America, is delineated in the Ptolemaic zodiac by the austral crown, which appears to portray Quiche and Yucatan, right? The Maya, Quiche. It is unfortunate that the daughters of Atlas, here mentioned, cannot all be located. They all become first ancestors of nations. That saying seems to imply that they left their oceanic domicile, and by migration across the Atlantic, they became stem parents of Asiatic, European, and African nationalities. This can rarely be believed because the mythological dictionary of the Greeks is full of them. They are names of classic authors. Though these names are obscure, the relations of Atlas and his wife Electra are more than usually distinct. The Cosmogony of Sanchoniathon supplies further details concerning the historical antiquities of the Atlantic isle, especially in relation to the Titans. But as that race is very important, it will be convenient to reserve that subject for a separate chapter. All right, and that's the end of chapter 11. All right, and that's the end of today's reading, guys. Don't want to get too long so people can actually sit down and watch these videos. You know, they're not too long. I hope you enjoyed the 3 chapters we went over today, very quick. And we're gonna finish this book, no worries. Pull out what you can, pull out the jewels, the diamonds, you know, the babies out the bathwater, dodge all the hijacks. But it's really letting you know something deep here. This book is very, very deep, you know, when it makes you think about certain things that we never noticed. But he's telling you straight up, these mythical gods, these people from the Phoenician cosmogony, so-called Greek, Roman cosmogony, all these cosmogonies and myths were actual people, were actually from the Americas, all these mythical lands where these ancient gods traveled to that nobody has ever found. They were just talking about the Americas, guys. America is the true old world. How many more books do I have to read? How many more different people telling you? All these books we never read, you know, in school. Nobody ever showed this to us. You know, we wouldn't even know these existed if we weren't even looking for them. But they were always there all these years, waiting for us to find them, waiting for somebody else to pick up the research, continue what these people left off. Because in their time, they were still limited. They were still had little hijacks. But we actually know now in 2024, we're starting to see the bigger picture. America is the true old world. When we're talking about true old world, antediluvian, yeah. What's older than that? Thanks for taking the time to hear me read again out loud to you. I appreciate you guys doing that. Thanks for tuning in once again. Anybody that was in the live chat or came after, thank you for taking the time to do that. Much love and respect. Pura vida, mi gente. Hawa.
Robert Dre, bye.